Bar for Bar album reviews, Aesop Rock and Blockhead, Garbology. Garbology is the latest album from Aesop Rock and marks a return to letting someone else handle production for an entire project, something that we haven't seen since Malibu Ken. This collaboration apparently came after the loss of Aesop Rock's close friend Kurt Hayashi during COVID, and it was also during this time where he was facing a period of feeling uncreative, so he chose to hit up Blockhead. According to Ace, Garbology is defined as the study of the material discarded by society to learn what it reveals about social or cultural patterns. He also feels that there are parallels to be seen between that and the idea of picking up the pieces after loss or periods of intense unrest and seeing what's really there. With this, it sounds like Ace really wants us to take a look into the album and see what we can find, which, to be fair, I mean, is something we should be doing with most albums, especially Ace's, though. The album begins with the track The Only Picture, which is a spoken piece from the painter Lucien Freud. It's an interesting intro because he mentions how he wants each picture that he's working on to be the only one he's working on, which is fine, but then he takes it even further, eventually saying that he wants it to be the only picture that anyone has ever done. This as an intro makes the project feel very ambitious. It really sounds like Ace wants this to be the only album that people listen to, or the only album that's been done. Or, at a minimum, the album that comes to mind when you think of Ace and Blockhead, which I think is probably more realistic. Next, we have Jazz Hands, which I've done a breakdown for already, so if you're interested, feel free to check that out. With this track, we have a lot of social commentary, and as I've listened to it more since its release as a single, it does seem to talk about many of the injustices that we've seen publicly over the past 18 months or so, as many of you have mentioned. It also seems to be touching a little bit on that insurrection that we had earlier this year. Wolf Piss is an interesting track. Here, Ace is painting a picture of this environment that we, the listener, have just kind of stumbled upon. And he's telling us all about life in it. And he's almost warning us with the chorus. The title itself comes from the idea that wolf urine is a way to kind of ward off predators and other dangers, which I guess gives us more of a look into the scene that he's created. It's kind of like he's living out in a cabin somewhere in the woods, and wild things just happen to happen. It does remind me a little bit of that promo video he did for one of his past albums, where he just kind of looked disheveled and was in a cabin or coming out of a cabin. I think it was for Skeleton, but I don't really remember. This sort of theme, also the cold and kind of just out in the wilderness, is something that he's done quite a bit and carries on throughout this album a lot as well. Legerdemain is probably one of my favorite tracks on this album, and carries that same theme of coldness through it. It also lends itself well to the idea that Ace is the weirdo that lives out in the woods and wants people to see what he found. The description of himself that he gives at the beginning is fun, too, with thermals over thermals over thermals and having an owl on his shoulder while wielding a katana. The chorus has him saying that he's found something in the woods and he wants to show us, and whatever we'll see there is going to leave us going home different. Each of these choruses is prefaced by like a nod to the police or some reference to the past or CCTVs, which kind of leads me to believe that it's more of a crime scene that he's found or stumbled upon or possibly created himself, rather than something more supernatural. This also goes into the idea, or makes sense, because legerdemain is defined as skillful use of one's hands while performing conjuring tricks or just being deceitful. So these things that have been found in the woods, according to Ace, may be tucked away due to this legerdemain, or he's doing it himself and he's just playing it off like he didn't. I don't have a whole lot to say about Difficult. It's a fun song. where Ace is just trying to say that he's not difficult, all while giving reasons why he is, or maybe seen as it. It kind of gives me those I'm stuck in my ways sort of vibes. And then All the Smartest People is a very strange song where Ace lists off a lot of his quirks, ranging from knowing the names of all the crows to his thoughts on the afterlife. It's also the shortest song on the album and feels a bit like an interlude because he almost stops halfway through just to have a conversation with himself. It's strange, but I enjoy it. But I can see why some people may be confused, to say the least. And then going into Oh Fudge, I don't know what he's trying to say here other than just reminding us that he's weird. I really do enjoy that bass line though. It's super smooth. More Cycles seems to be talking about cities, especially with the reference to New York City at the end. It does also get a bit morbid with the second verse where he talks about the afterlife and how there's no resting on the seventh day. With that in mind though, it could be that he's commenting on how everyone's just staying busy and working, even on their days off. Like, we're not taking the time to enjoy life. We're just, I guess, working. He also makes a bit of a note to that idea with the ending of the third verse, where he goes, "In a letter sent from Mr. I will not be home for dinner, it was written, I will not be home for the winter. A second letter showed up. Let's imagine we could open it together. I will not be home forever. This is NYC Untethered." Yeah. So it kind of makes sense. This sounds like someone who's always busy and works in New York. Maybe they travel and they stay in New York for some time. Or they drive back and forth possibly. But, people in business tend to keep working and don't really pay attention to what's going on outside of that. King of Pink gives us one of those Ace talking about himself to himself sort of tracks where he's being a little braggadocious, but only in a way that Ace could do. I mean, who else would say, "I am dumb enough to run through a wall," in the same verse as "you laughing because I'm different, I'm laughing because you're the same"? I didn't really care for All Day Breakfast as much as I thought I would, just because, Homeboy Sandman and Aesop Rock and Blockhead sounds like it would be a good idea. But I think that's really just due to the instrumental. The track itself, it's fine, it's not bad. But I think just the way that the beat continues to build up and then just stops is a little bit off-putting. Like, I feel like there was no conclusion to it. It just kind of ended. Fizz has one of my favorite choruses on the album and often gets stuck in my head. Let me get a fry. Ace also really just rides this beat, which is also one of my favorites on this album. The sample and the bass line go really well together. That Is Not a Wizard takes us for an interesting ride, to say the least, where Ace takes us through some of this relearning that he may have had to do. The chorus makes it sound like he was in therapy and it's kind of helped him fix himself. Then with the second verse, he goes into some of these things that he likes and lists off stuff almost as if he was a Viking, which if this is something that he wants to do, cool. But it's almost like he's talking about these different lives that he's lived too. So there's a lot to really pick apart at that track. The C goes into the idea of Garbology really well, with references to how all these material things that we have and want eventually just kind of end up in the waste or the ocean. He also uses this to remind us that life is less about the things that we have and more about the things that we experience, similar to what he was talking about on More Cycles. The final track is Abandoned Mauls, and it feels like an ode, and it probably is an ode to those who have passed. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this review, Ace's close friend, Kurt, passed away prior to the recording of this album, and he even mentions him in the first verse. I think the idea of the abandoned mall here is more meant to be a place of remembrance. Like, this mall may have been a literal mall that Ace used to go to with people and just had memories there. But we could also go even further, and Ace could be just making this mall to be his mind, where all these memories are stored. As a closing track, it does a great job of wrapping everything up, though. Overall, this album was really solid, and it always feels like a quick listen, even at 50 minutes. Which, just a side note, I mean, the length of an album shouldn't really determine if you listen to it or not, which is why I stopped even mentioning that. It's just, this, like, some albums, they don't feel like they nearly an hour long, and this was one of them. I'm glad that Ace and Blockhead have come together again for a full project, because even though Ace himself is a dope producer, there's always something different when you have another person to collaborate with. As far as the Garbology aspect of this album, Ace does a good job of bringing it up frequently, but because it's Ace, it's not always clear where he's going with it or what point he's trying to make. I mean, I could very well spend hours upon hours attempting to dissect what he's actually, or what he's saying, without actually knowing for sure if that's what he was going for. But that's kind of the beauty of music, or his music at least. Like, there's a lot of ways to interpret it. If it's something like, if you want to, you can sit down and analyze it, or you can just listen to it and pick things up as you go. My favorite tracks are Ledger Domain, Jazz Hands, All the Smartest People, Fizz, and Abandoned Mauls. Yeah, this album was good. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it feels like a very quick listen. Ace really did try to bring in the Garbology aspect quite a bit, I feel. And although I didn't mention it too much because I didn't want to be here for 2 hours talking at a camera, there's a lot there. But if you want me to go through any of the other tracks and do like a proper breakdown for it as well, let me know in the comments below. Also, while you're there, let me know what you thought of this album and what your favorite tracks are. Also, remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more reviews and content like this. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe out there.